So if you think that the customization options of front ends like Isu and Cannoli are a little bit too much for you, let's look at the opposite side of the coin and look at something completely minimalist. This is Cannoli. So for those of you who are familiar with MinUI, which is a front end which is used on some Anbinic devices and also some MIUI devices and possibly some others as well, I do believe it covers quite a few, then this is basically a spiritual successor to that, specifically for AYN devices or Android devices. So it's a single screen front end. It's not dual screen, but it allows you, if you use something like Mjolnir, you can have Cannoli up top and then something on the bottom, whatever app launcher or however you want to customize that. That's entirely up to you. So in order to install it, the first thing we're going to do is go to Obtainium. If you've not seen any of my other videos, then Obtainium is just an app which basically we give it a list of apps to track through GitHub, and it tells us when there's updates and things like that. I've detailed it in many other videos. I'll leave a link in the description to one of them for setting that up. So we'll go to Obtainium. We'll give it a moment just to run through the refresh. And then if we just collapse that emulator, we're looking for this front end section. And there you can see, nice and colorful, we've got that Cannoli app there. So we're going to tap into that and then just press install. Okay, it's giving me a rate limit exceeded error. If this happens, then that link where it says github.com, I'm just going to tap into that and download it myself. Because if you want something done right. So I'm going to scroll, and on the right hand side here where it says releases 1.4.0, I'm just going to click into that and then grab this APK. Now once it's downloaded, which shouldn't take too long, it's only 294 megabytes. It should. There we go. We're going to open that up and then we're going to click install. And then once it's installed, we are going to open it. So the first thing we're going to have to do is obviously give it permissions. So press any button, it'll take you to the files access. We're going to tick that little toggle and then we're just going to press back, and that will take us to the next part of the setup screen. So the first thing it's going to do is ask you for where you want to set up your Cannoli folder. So Cannoli is very different to a lot of front ends. Usually a front end, for example, Cocoon or Isu or ESDE will have a folder. It'll have its own assets in there, maybe some configs and profiles. But in terms of your BIOS and your ROMs, you can have those separate. Cannoli will give you those folders already because it has its own file structure. So one thing that when I was testing this, I noticed was that my PS1 games weren't recognized, because whereas my PS1 folder is actually called PSX, which is the terminology used in ESDE and so I've always used for emulation, then Cannoli, based off MinUI, uses just PS, and it's all capitals and it's all very specific. As for this, I'm just going to use the internal storage. This will create a folder with everything I need in it, except the BIOS and the games, which I'll have to provide, which I'll show you shortly. So one thing I did notice as well is some of these buttons don't seem to work properly. So I'm pressing L and R and nothing is happening. However, the arrows work fine. So I'm just going to pick the internal storage and then press continue. So it only takes a second and it's now ready to be garnished. So they're very thematic with their style. So obviously we have no content yet. So what I'm going to do is we'll explore the options and then we'll add some games and we'll have a little bit of a play around. So these button prompts are a little bit annoying. So what I'm going to do is go to, so I have to press the Y button, which it registers as X, which obviously if you're using a normal Xbox controller or if you're on an Android device would be fine. But I'm not. I'm on an AYN Thor and that uses the Nintendo Switch layout. So we'll go across to input, and I don't know if swap plane resume will help. Because as you can see here, it thinks I'm pressing the A button, but on the right hand side, it says I'm actually pressing the B button. So don't know what's happening there. Can I change the controller profile? If we go to profiles, default controls. Well, there we go. So I can do default controls. So you do have to remap the controls, which is a bit weird for a front end. So I'll just, oh, I did those the wrong way around. That's on me. I'll go through and just make sure everything is mapped correctly. D-pad seems fine. We'll leave it as is. Don't know what that mode button is for menu, but I can't go back. I'm trying to exit out of the screen. How do I? There we go. That seems to be working now. So, oh, hang on. So even though I've set those controls, it's still treating A as back and B as... Do I have to restart? I've mapped the controls. If I remap the confirm button first to free this button. So again, very odd. There we go. There we go. Cooking with gas. We're back to normal. So a little bit of finickiness when we're trying to set up those initial controls. So hopefully that's something that's maybe updated in a patch to make it a little bit more streamlined, or at least as part of the onboarding, is to make sure that your controls match what it's telling you, because it's a little bit mind-boggling when you're trying to do it as you just saw. So let's go through the settings. So we've got our appearance. So there is some settings options here. Obviously, it doesn't have the level of customization, but it's not about that. Cannoli is very stubborn in its interpretation of MinUI. So you can change your highlight and accent colors. So you have a nice pink. I don't know if you can see there. If I move my fat head out of the way, you can see that we've got some pinkness on the accents. You can also change the highlights, which that looks kind of gross. But I quite like just as the standard black and white. So we'll just stick with that. So you can control your art width and your art scale, and I don't believe it comes with any background images. So we don't have any background images, so there's none there for us to load. Font, we have the default font. We've also got the OG, which is the proper MinUI font, which I quite like. It's quite chunky. For our status bar, you can show or hide your icons. I like having the 24-hour clock. I'm not scared. You can have a VPN show. You have your Wi-Fi symbol show. I don't really need to see much of that. We'll hide Bluetooth as well. Just the time will do. And we'll show... We'll keep battery, actually. And then one thing to note as well is, even though I've remapped the buttons, I'm pressing L and R, nothing's happening. But again, these are in beta, so there will be some little quirks that need to be ironed out. So for text size, you can just press left right here to change the text size. You can have it nice and small, you can have it nice and fat, or anywhere in between. I'm going to leave it on the default 24 because it looks fine. And then title, I believe. Oh, don't know what title it was asking me for there. I thought it was to do with the titles on the games, but it just gave me a text box. So for library, so there's different content modes in here. You can have the default, which is just a standard list of systems. There's also collections only. So if you like to kind of manage your games into collections, and I believe you manage them through here. I've not looked too deep at the collections. And then you have the 5-game handheld, which is, I don't know if it was kind of created by or just popularized by Russ from Retro Game Core, who his philosophy for a lot of these kind of minimalist handhelds or minimalist front ends is you pick 5 games to have on your device at any one time, no more, no less. Personally, I like having everything available because I travel with this a lot, or I like carrying it around. It's always good to have games that I might fancy playing. You also have it show or hide recently played. You can have it show or hide empty platforms, which I don't know why you'd ever show empty platforms. I'm just going to keep them unhid. So manage ports and manage tools. So I haven't quite got my head around this yet. So if we go to manage ports, it's a list of the apps I have installed, and the same for tools. So I don't know if I manually say, right, I'll have my Azahar, I'll have my Simu, we'll have Dolphin, we'll have my just some emulators, and then if I use ports and then use that more for apps, so if I have my Chrome, for example, or my Solid Explorer anywhere down here, all the way right at the bottom, Solid Explorer. So I don't know if that's just a way to filter those into collections. I'm not 100% on that, but I'm sure we'll find that out shortly. So obviously our root directory is there, so you can always change that, I believe. So you can use a specific location, but I'm just going to leave it as is. I'm meant to, oh, why is cancel not B? And then the same for the ROM directory. You can use the Cannoli root folder, or if you have one pre-prepared, then you can use that one. However, as I said before, because of the way Cannoli handles everything, it has a totally different folder structure to what I'm used to. So I'm not going to use my main ROM directory. What instead I'm going to do is I'm going to use some ROMs that I have on my PC. And I'm going to show you a feature called Nonna's Kitchen, which is quite unique. And basically, it's a built-in file browser, which I'll get to more in depth shortly. You can see it there listed on the settings screen. Don't need to cover input because I think I've spent enough time messing about with the input screen. Retro achievements. I love retro achievements. I've can't get enough, so I'm just going to sign into retro achievements as well. So one thing to note as well, this front end is unfortunately not touchscreen compatible, as I found out when I was pouring like an angry gorilla just trying to enter my retro achievements credentials. I don't believe that's something that will be coming in the future, as I found out when I raised some tickets on the GitHub about remapping ROM folders. I just got told no. So I respect the commitment, but for quality of life, it's a shame. But I'm not a developer, it's his choice. So I'm all logged in. That's retro achievements. So we'll have a quick look at advanced as well. So we can see our core mapping. So when you've installed RetroArch, which I imagine if you watch this video, you most likely have. If not, check out my other videos for a guide on setting up RetroArch, which is one of our main emulators. You can see here that there are some cores that are pre-populated. So it doesn't go off what you've actually got installed. It just goes off some defaults. So most of these are RetroArch cores, but you can remap them. So if I go to, so for example, for Dreamcast, I don't use the Flycast core. I use the standalone version, which, there it is. Although when I'm choosing it, it doesn't seem to be persisting. So I don't know what's happening there. Yeah, it doesn't seem to want to map the so we're just going to look at the advanced very quickly. So we have the RetroArch DIY mode, which is on, although I believe this is a little bit finicky. So for the RetroArch package, so I have been using the Link version for Emulink, which I covered in another video, which I recommend. It's one of my favorite apps. It's incredibly underrated. So check out that video if you haven't already. So we have here our core mapping. So I have noticed that even though the DIY mode is enabled, when I try and change any of the cores, it doesn't persist. So I don't know if if I disable the DIY mode and do it that way. That works, kind of. When I change it to some cores, but not others. So it does seem quite unintuitive in that sense. So hopefully, again, something that is fixed. So I'll just leave it on DIY mode. Hopefully I'll be able to get a game to boot, although it's not looking too likely at this stage. So So even looking for things like DuckStation standalone, so it's there. It's not. It still says it's PCSX Realm, which I don't want. So we'll see how far we get when it comes to actually trying to run games. Again, it is a beta. Debug logging, this is more for a developer kind of thing. Kitchen code bypass. So what I'll show shortly is Nonna's Kitchen, like I mentioned. So in order to connect to Nonna's Kitchen, we're going to use a browser on our PC, and it's going to ask you for a code. So you can bypass the code if you want. I'm not going to. I'm just going to leave it as is for now. So that's it for the settings. So what was it about there? So there's a link there. So if you like it, support the dev, tell your friends. It is a cool little front end. It's not one personally that I'd use due to a lot of the limitations, which is by design. So I respect that. In a world where a lot of front ends are focused on customization, this is as stubborn as you want. So I respect the stubbornness of it. So this is Nonna's Kitchen. So you can see there it's giving us a QR code, which is just that link below. And then there's also underneath that, there's a 6-digit code. So like I just saw in the advanced menu, we can bypass that if we want, but I'm not going to, and I'll show you why. So I'm just going to flick over to my desktop, and then I'm going to load up a browser. So if you're not familiar with FTP or wireless transfers or anything like that, or any networking, that code here is just it's a device address, not like a web address. So all you need to do is go to your browser and input that address. So we'll do 192.168.1.29. So that's always the device address. So in terms of the 192.168, that just means local. So I don't worry about sharing that because it'll be the same for you. The only thing that might be different is those last 2 digits because it can vary. Then I'm going to press shift and do a colon because we need to put in our port, which in this case is 1091. So you imagine you've got a street full of houses. Which door we've got to open? So we can see there that we've logged into Nonna's Kitchen. So we're actually logged in to the device right now. So it's asking me for a pin, which is DVK7F. So now I'm in. Obviously, like I said, if I just disabled or enabled the pin bypass, it would have just come straight to this screen. So this is Nonna's Kitchen. So this allows us to basically access the front end from our computer. So if you've got some games on your PC, or if you want to adhere to the 5-game handheld, this is probably the best way to manage them. So if I go into a system, I can see I've got a section for ROMs, for saves. It says save status coming soon, our BIOS, our box art, and our guides. So I don't believe this has a scraper. So everything's very kind of manual, which, in my opinion, I think kind of defeats the purpose of it being kind of a plug and play system. But again, maybe something that will come in future. So what I'll do to start is I will just go to my emulation folder. I'm going to grab a NES game. So if I just grab, let's do Castlevania. Just going to drag. Ooh. So first I'm going to click into ROMs, and then I'm going to drag and drop that in there. So it's only a tiny thing, so you can see it's there. And if I click the little edit button, I can rename it. So I'm just going to get to that revision 1. So it's nice and neat. You can link guide. You can upload guides in here. I believe it's text files. I'm not sure if it handles anything like PDFs or anything. I believe it might just be text, but don't quote me on that. And then I don't know what this arrow does. Oh, you can move it to subfolders if you want. So if you want some specific subfolders for collections, you can do that. But I'm going to just move it to there. Because is it in the system? It looks to be. So now if I just go back here, and if I go to my Solid Explorer, and then I'm going to go to my Cannoli folder that I can see there. I'm going to go into ROMs, and I'm looking for NES. And there we are, Castlevania is here. So it just transferred straight across, no messing. So hopefully that persists. Although I suspect it might have some issues maybe with bigger games. For BIOS, I don't need one for NES, but obviously for PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2 games, you will, so you can drag that in there. For box art, so you can bulk upload pre-named files. However, I don't, so I'm just going to quickly grab NES Castlevania off Google. And then just grab the Wikipedia one. Hey. So I'll just quickly save this image just as a demonstration so we can see how it looks on the front end. And I've just closed it because I'm a moron. So I'll just open that up again. And then I'll go back to our Nonna's kitchen. There it is. So back to our ROMs. I can see it's still there. We're going to click add art. Or you can just do it from there. You can just click add art from there. And then we're going to grab that cover. There we go. Castlevania. Jobs are good. There's some customization there, so you can add some wallpapers. So if I add my actual desktop wallpaper, got a couple, if I drag them in there, we'll see what they look like as well. So now we'll flip back over and we'll try and boot again. Okay, so we're here. So if I go to back to our main screen. Okay, so we're here. So I've just backed out to our main screen. So I've got NES there. And then as you can see, I've got Castlevania. And on the right-hand side are box art. And then in ports, I've got the apps are set to ports and tools, just the two that are set to tools. So it's just a quick way to kind of access them from that, the checkbox. If you want specific ones in specific folders, you can do that. Although ports and tools are probably a bit of a weird way to clarify. Apps or emulators would have been fine, but I'm not a developer. We'll quickly nip into appearance. We'll see if we can set that background image. So yeah, I've got what is my desktop, the Great of Kanagawa, and then I've got a nice retro wave version of it as well, which I found online. However, it does kind of clash with that, so I'm just going to leave it on none. But it's good to see that it is possible. So if I go back into NES, and then we'll boot up Castlevania, and we've booted straight in, no messing about. I don't actually know where the Retro Achievements integration comes in, because I've booted through RetroArch, but it seems to be its own version of RetroArch, so it's not your normal installed one, I believe. So it's very it hasn't given me any notification as to. Oh, there we go. So if I press the back button, I can get to this screen. So I can see there what achievements are available. I didn't get any notification that it actually logged in successfully. So hopefully that is something. And then in here, I can change the settings. So I can use some integer scaling if I want to. You can change the screen sharpness. You can add a shader. So, oh, there's a Cannoli has its own shader. How does that look? Oh, wow. So that is a proper old CRT style, although for some reason it froze for a few seconds there. It's probably loading something in the background. So if you really want that retro feel, then you can go for that. So I'll just put call reported. We'll leave screenshot, and then what else we got was easy mode. Oh, it's like a more flat CRT with some scan lines on there. So it's very easy to kind of play around. It is like a very, very abridged version of RetroArch. What else have we got in here? So there's some systems in there. FDS, not too sure what that is. There's video filters. You can set the overscan if it's if you want to kind of adjust where the screen layout is. Audio, Game Genie sound distortion. So as if you really want that retro feel to have that kind of pixel crunched or bit crunched way. Input, you can change some zappers, Arkanoid devices. There's all sorts of options in here. To be honest with you, I'm not sure what most of them are. And then for emulation hacks, we also have, remove the sprite limit, which can sometimes affect how some games run. You can overclock, which I don't think you really need to for most of this. Controls, you can have default controls, or I think you can make new control profiles and do it that way. Shortcuts, I think that's just a kind of key mapping. And then there's a max fast forward speed as well. And then there's just some information about the game and the core and things like that. It has logged me into RetroPup, that's good. So there we are. That was an in-depth look at Cannoli. I don't think it's one I'll be using very often, but for those of you who are big fans of MinUI, or you want something a little bit more to the point than the more advanced front ends like Cocoon, like ISU or ESD, then it's well worth a try. It's completely free. It's available on Obtainium. And yeah, as always, if you like this video, I'd appreciate a like and a subscribe. Tell your friends, and I'll see you next time. Hopefully, it won't be as long a gap. So take care.